Okay, welcome back. Hour number 3. Very busy night. Lots of information for you. David Duke joins us this hour. David, of course, has a program on the Rents Radio Network, heard Monday through Friday. Very honored to have David with us as a colleague and friend. His viewpoints may not agree with yours necessarily, but he is a very articulate man, a true student of history, who is well-versed in the world and its machinations and where it's been and where it's going. He specializes, of course, in the Zionist issue on the planet and the issue of the chosen, those who think that they are better than the rest of us, the supremacist movement among Zionists and Jews, which is a real problem. David, welcome back. How are you?
Well, I'm just fine, and great to be with you.
Yeah.
Jeff, it's really great to be able to speak with you again. It's I don't seem to speak with you as much now since I've been doing the daily show at 11 a.m. on Eastern Time.
Funny how that works. We got to get you on more often here. The show is doing great. I hear nothing but good things about it. We just had to sit back and watch. And now, certainly there were varying levels of sophistication and conspiracy in this attack on Gaza. And folks, don't ever fall for the Zionist press lie of describing Palestinians who are forced to live in the Gaza Peninsula, in that world's largest outdoor prison. They are not Gazans. They're Palestinians. This is one of the biggest obvious fake-outs that I've seen in years. They are not Gazans. They're Palestinians. And they were murdered, as usual, by American taxpayer-supported military operations against them. There were a lot of interesting developments, though, as we heard last hour with Gordon Duff, and we talked about the Iron Dome and how it failed rather dramatically. Many other issues involved as well. David, tell us your views of what's going on in general. You don't have to stick to that topic. Let's just jump in.
Well, I guess we could start with that. Obviously, this is what I'd like to draw home. I mean, everybody is in the media, at least the massive thrust of media in America and Europe and around the world, that somehow Israel was retaliating. President Obama got on national television the other day, and he said that, I'll give a quote, he said, the precipitating event here that's causing the current crisis is an ever-escalating number of missiles fired from Gaza into Israel. And there's no country on earth that would tolerate missiles raining down on its citizens from outside its borders. But of course, this is completely mendacious. I mean, it's a complete lie. There's no question about the fact this is really not true. The real cause of the Gaza crisis was ignored by Obama, and that's the fact that Gaza is a huge concentration camp. 85% of the people of Gaza are either themselves refugees or the children of refugees who were forcibly, ethnically cleansed from their own homes, their own businesses, their own farms. They were murdered. They were terrorized. They have been tortured in the prisons. Israel routinely goes in and so-called assassinates elected officials who are not in any way terrorists. They even massacred and bombed news buildings today with some of the Western press because they didn't want the Western press to have any sort of images or reality of what's happening to the children of Gaza, the Palestinians there. So it's all a lie. And but I do want to go beyond this today. I thought maybe I'd talk about something different than a lot of your guests and try to focus on another aspect of the problem.
By all means, sure. We've been through the whole subject pretty thoroughly on this program and elsewhere, right. And I think we've got a handle on it. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, well, I know you always do. But I'd like to talk for a second about the process of who really does run the world. I mean, we often hear, Alex Jones is one of those guys that always talks about the elite, the financial elite, the elite that kind of dominate the earth. We hear about the Bilderbergers, we hear about the trilaterals, we hear about all these other terms. Well, I would like to make the case that this is not simply an elite of the richest people on earth that's causing this globalism, that's causing this support for Zionism, that's causing this incredible banking ripoff, which basically is stealing trillions and trillions of dollars out of the American and the world economy on a yearly basis. I would argue that it's actually a tribalist, extremist elite. And I'm going to give you an example this way. If it was just rich people, why would we have policies such as the Iraq War or the Afghanistan War? Because every major business corporation, you know, they often used to talk, Eisenhower used to speak about the so-called military-industrial complex. And that's really an outmoded term today, because the people who really dominate America are, in fact, the financial institutions, the international banks. A good example is people often hear about big oil, and I think that's part of the Zionist, or what I call the Zio media. They often try to bring us on to different enemies, and they talk about big oil controlling American politics. Well, I looked at the contributions for the two major candidates, both Romney and Obama, for President of the United States. So there's 40 major candidates listed by the Federal Election Commission. These are the bundled corporate contributors. And of those 40, guess what, Jeff? Not one oil company. Over half of them were, in fact, international banks. More than half of the biggest corporate contributors were absolutely dominated by Jewish extremists, what I call Jewish tribalists. I see Zionism as just the latest aspect of a radical Jewish tribalism. It's like a Jewish supremacism. That's why my book is titled Jewish Supremacism. Now, think about this for a second. I hope your listeners will think for a moment about this, how it's not just some sort of economic elite. When you had the war, for instance, in Afghanistan and Iraq, and you have these crises for these wars. Let me give you an example this way. Let's talk about American business. Obviously, spending trillions of dollars in Iraq doesn't help 90% of the businesses in America. Oil prices go up, taxes go up to support these wars, the debt of the American people goes up, the currency even held by these corporations, most of them, not counting the banks, that loses value, right? Apple doesn't sell any more computers. You know, when we spend the money on these kind of wars, when people have less money in their pocket.
Yep.
It's when we have recession, when we have, right, exactly. Neither does IBM, neither does all these major corporations. Everyone is harmed. The only people who benefit, really, are some of the collaborators. I mean, you do have some things like Caterpillar or some defense contractors, but defense contractors are a tiny percentage of the economy. Obviously, most of our economy is consumers, and all these people are harmed. Most of the rich people on the planet, and in fact, there's certainly Jews have a disproportionate number of the rich, but most people with money don't benefit this because their currency in their pocket, if they're Americans, goes down. The value, the same thing is true in Europe. The economy goes down, their holdings go down, their values of their property goes down. So it's not simply a few rich people with the CFR, the Bilderbergers, or some financial elite. It's a particular elite. Now, a good example of this, another proof of this.
By the way, that elite, David, as you know, 0.20% of the world population. 0.20.
Exactly. And that's another good point too. But let's go for a second into the thing with Israel again and what the policy is there. Israel, of course, is an ethnic supremacist state. It has very strict immigration laws. Netanyahu got up and he bragged to the world and the Jewish press how they have completely cut off any African refugees from coming in Israel. I mean, totally off. They said there were about 56 captured and all those were expelled. And this is the same nation that got America and Europe to adopt these massive refugee policies, you see, where you had to take the refugees. But Israel doesn't. Israel is a state based on the preservation of the Jewish people. They even have laws against intermarriage of Jews and non-Jews. If any European nation did that, or America tried to do that, say disallowing marriage between a Gentile and a Jew, or between a Gentile or a European and any non-European, you imagine, you know how the press would react, and yet somehow Israel gets by with all this. So why would the massive globalist media and the massive globalist power support massive immigration into America and Europe, non-European immigration into these countries, while at the same time oppose this immigration in Israel, except for the fact that the elite that's being served here is not any sort of elite that's American or European. It is a Zionist elite. And another good example is, let's take a look at the Federal Reserve. I mean, the head of the Federal Reserve, of course, has been Shalom Bernanke. The vice chair is Janet Yellen. The former head of the Federal Reserve was, well, Alan Greenspan. His vice chair was Mr. Cohn. All of them Jewish extremists. We don't have a Federal Reserve that's of the American people. We have a Zio-Fed. We have a Zio-Fed, I like to call it. But and these people know what they're going to do. Whatever Bernanke does, he could make a slight difference in interest rates. This affects thousands of markets all over the world. I am sure that his tribal entity and this tribal elite around the world knows what they're going to do ahead of time. They can skim trillions of dollars off the economy of any country. Now, no matter who the president is, whatever party comes in,
right? Of course,
there's no change, right? I mean, in fact, easily change in the middle of some term, and it's groups like Goldman Sachs, the biggest, another Zionist predator bank. Goldman Sachs even has most of the people who run our economy and one of our monetary policy is again controlled by Goldman Sachs ex-employees and ex-officers of that corporation, a very criminal bank, by the way, in so many ways.